Hi there, it's Jenny, and this is my channel, This Story Ain't Over, where I talk about books and give you my book reviews. Today we are wrapping up the 13 books that I read in March. It was a pretty awesome month, to be honest. I got so much done, but we'll get into my stats in a sec on how I got that much reading done, because it was a bit unconventional for me. But first, I thought it might be fun to just give you a life update, tell you how my month went if you're interested. If you're not interested, just skip right on by to the next chapter. So, March was the first month that I was fully self-employed, which was something new for me. If you're new to the channel, I recently left my full-time job as a marketing girly in February and decided to take the leap into full-time content creation and just being a YouTuber, publisher, writer, trying to write my debut novel. And also in March, I decided to open a Etsy bookish gift sticker shop, which was also something new. Those of you who have been following my channel since earlier this year, you know that I created a Notion reading tracker template. And so back in January, I had opened this Etsy shop to be able to sell that template. And honestly, I had a pretty good experience with Etsy. So I was like, you know what, maybe I should try actually doing that merch thing that I always wanted to do. I always want to make bookish merch of some kind. I always want to make stickers of some kind. I always want to make like bookmarks. I want to do apparel and like reading journals and like book sleeves at some point. And honestly, having started this, I am thinking about doing more, but we'll see how this goes first. So when I'm filming this, it's April 2nd. And yesterday we launched the shop along with this day in the life video that I filmed about, just starting the business and all of that. So if you haven't watched that video, go check it out because I had so much fun making it and it was just something different for me. So I hope you'll enjoy it. I personally hand drew or designed, like graphic designed and pulled together elements for all of the designs that you see on the shop. And I'm honestly so happy with how I challenged myself creatively with that. So that was a lot of fun. Now I'm in the process of just like figuring out what small business content is because I opened an Instagram account for the shop. Please go follow it if you don't mind. It's at shop This Story Ain't Over. It's also linked in my main Instagram bio, so you can also follow it there. Oh my god, it's so fucking windy outside. There's like a fucking blizzard going on. If you hear noises and things shaking, that's why. I live in a Toronto high-rise and I swear at some point I'm gonna die, but it's fine. Anyways, what was I saying? Yeah, the interesting thing about the Etsy shop has been just seeing which designs have sold. I'm going to be packing our first few orders today and I'm so freaking excited because yeah, it's just like kind of a dream come true and kind of like this really cool thing that people want to like buy my art and buy designs that I made. Like that's just so cool. And that I might get to see like the stickers on your stuff is going to be so cool. Anyways, what was I trying to say? Oh yes, I was going to say that it was really interesting to see which stickers people have been ordering because I both made designs that I felt like were unique to me and were like fresh and new ideas. And then I also made a lot of stickers that were like more traditional, basic, bookish stickers that you could probably find at someone else's shop, but like my own spin on it or my own design for it. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that the first few orders were mostly of things that I had thought of myself and that were fairly original to me, which was just so nice to see because it just shows that you guys are invested in like the things that I talk about here and like the values that I, put across here, and that just made me really happy. So if you haven't checked out the Etsy shop yet, go check it out. It is linked down below. These are a few of my favorite designs. I really, really like them, so maybe you'll want to grab them. And I should say all the stickers are vinyl and they are laminated for durability and they are handmade by me and they are mailed via regular envelope mail, so you'll just get it in like your mailbox. Let me know if you guys want any kind of like small business content here, if you want it in the long form, if you want more vlogs. Honestly, my vlogs don't do that well, so like I am less motivated to make them, but I do really, really like doing them. And I like the new style I kind of developed with my last vlog. So maybe this becomes like a second channel thing. Who knows? I'll let you know. Otherwise, in terms of my life, the other thing that I have going on is of course writing my debut novel. If you want more info on that, go watch my last vlog. But I did reach 10,000 words in my draft in March, which is pretty exciting. The total book will be around 75,000 words, which is around 300 to 350 pages in a finished book. And the book is a literary fiction, a bit of a satire, so that feels like a good length. I definitely need to work on just being more focused with the project and working on it every day, but I do feel pretty proud of myself for getting through my writing paralysis from the past few years and just starting on this project. And I've also been doing weekly writing sprints with my friend Hannah from A Clockwork Reader, and we've been doing that twice a week, so that's really helped me get some progress in, and I'm just so proud of how that's coming across. If you're interested, I also created a writer bookmark to track your word count while you write your work in progress, and it's also available on the Etsy shop if you want to grab it. Oh my god, I swear the apocalypse is coming. I am like scared for my life. Okay, so it's a couple days later because I had to stop filming the day I was filming this because there was a massive storm in Toronto and like the windows were icy and there was wind blowing against the windows. And I ended up going away for the weekend for my nephew's birthday. So here we are a few days later to finish this wrap up. But without further ado, let's talk about my stats for the month. So if you watched my last wrap up for January and February of 2025, then you probably saw that I have this new format where I show you my stats for the month or months. And I basically go through that and just talk about, what has changed, what is different, what is new. And I personally just liked looking at my reading this way. So yeah, we're going to do that again. So I'm going to start with this second page because I think it's interesting to start with. So for March, I finished 13 books in total, but I also started 9 books, which is a fair amount. I think in January and February, I did end up starting way more books than I finished. But luckily for March, I did end up finishing more books. So that's nice. One thing I will say is that I am a chronic sort of reading many books at a time person. With my ADHD, I easily get bored and I need to like switch between things when I'm not feeling a vibe or I'm not in the mood. And I'm also typically reading a different book on my e-reader versus the physical versus an audiobook. And then in terms of books that I received, so these are from publishers or from, PR companies or for sponsorships, that kind of thing. I received 2 finished copies. I received 2 physical ARCs. ARCs are advanced reader copies, if you're unfamiliar. So basically publishers will send reviewers like me early copies of books to read and review before the book comes out so that they can build buzz around the book and just get those like initial reviews in so that when people are going to buy it when it's actually out, they have some frame of reference. And then I also got approved for 11 e-arcs on NetGalley. Again, NetGalley is like a online platform for book reviewers to request e-arcs or digital advanced reader copies. Typically, you can read them on the NetGalley app or on an iPad or, computer, or you can send them to a Kindle. You could also previously put them on a Kobo e-reader, which is the e-readers that I have. But unfortunately, NetGalley recently changed their format or like their file type for their arcs. And so now that's not supported by Kobo. And so I can't actually like put my e-arcs on my Kobo anymore, which is absolutely deeply frustrating because actually most of the books that I read on my e-reader are e-arcs. It was really irritating to me when that change happened and they don't have it on their timeline to like fix that anytime soon. So I think I'm gonna have to start making use of my iPad way more often, but it's just not the same because I have like a fairly large iPad and the screen of an iPad is just not the same as an e-reader, which is like easy on the eyes and just like much nicer to read on. It feels like paper and it's also just like much lighter as well. Anyways, rant aside, those are the books that I received. In terms of the books I bought 4 paperback books, I bought 4 hardcovers, and then I also bought 1 audiobook, and that audiobook was Sunrise on the Reaping because I wanted to listen to the audiobook while I read it rather than reading on the physical copy, even though I also bought the hardcover. And this is a constant like struggle and, issue for me where I have like physical books or, even e-copies of books, but I can't like physically get myself to like sit down and read. It's very, very difficult for me to do that these days with my ADHD, even though I'm on medication, even though I take a lot of steps to like manage my ADHD, but with the way that I need to read a lot of books for my channel, I can't physically sit and read for, long periods of time. So I need to have the audiobook in some way to actually get myself to read. And we'll talk about my stats in terms of like reading methods in a sec. But what I ended up doing was, getting the hardcover of Sunrise on the Reaping, but then I also got the audiobooks so that I could listen to it while I crocheted, but also while I read the physical copy because I just can't do the physical copy on its own anymore. And it's just so frustrating because I end up spending more money on books. But that's why I have like multiple audiobook apps. Everand is a really, really great one in my opinion that I absolutely adore because it has a rotating library of books that you can listen to sort of like whenever. And it's basically like a subscription each month, which is fairly cheap in my opinion because you get access to multiple audiobooks and ebooks. I mostly use it for the audiobooks. And although you won't get access to all of the books that you may want, and they sometimes don't have newer releases on the app, I still personally think it's way more worth it than other audiobook apps. But you get like multiple books and I think it's just like a better deal overall. And so they did have Sunrise on the Reaping. So that's my hot tip on audiobooks. If you want to go check out Everand, you can use my affiliate link down below and that does earn me a commission, which is really helpful for me. So definitely check that out if you are interested. Okay, let's talk about my stats in terms of what I actually finished reading. So in terms of my genres, I had a much different mix than I had for January and February, where I read I think more genres. But this time I have a pretty good mix, but I feel like this is a little bit more reflective of my regular reading. So I had 5 lit fit books that I read, 3 romances, 2 sci-fi, and 3 nonfic. Actually, the romance and the nonfic are a little bit atypical. I don't usually read a lot of romance, and I don't usually read a lot of nonfiction. But this month I read a couple nonfictions that I was really excited for, and I'll talk about those in a second. And then 5 lit fic is pretty typical for me. I feel like most of the books that I read now are lit fic. Lit fic means literary fiction, if you didn't know. And yeah, I feel like my taste has just changed so much over these past few years. And I used to be exclusively a sci-fi fantasy reader, and now I am a full-on lit fic girly who is reading all of the translated fictions and literary fictions that you might see on little corner of book talk that is not obsessed with romance and smut books, which I still appreciate and love. In terms of what I received and what I purchased, I did receive a lot of books from publishers, but I did end up purchasing more books this month than I received, though this does not take into account the e-arcs I received, which I don't count towards this part of the stats just because I'm thinking of my physical collection. And then we have the authors that I read. So I read 33% white authors, 25% black authors, 16.7% East Asian, 16.7% Arab authors, and 8.3% Indigenous authors. March was a much better mix in terms of author backgrounds than previous months, I think. So that was really good. Though, as you can see, white authors are still a significant amount, even though they aren't my majority. But I think that's just an effect of, a lot of popular books are by white authors. And actually, a lot of books that get sent to me are also by white authors, which is kind of frustrating. And actually, I was thinking about this the other day as I was going through my email of all of the review copy requests that I received from publishers. Basically, publicists will email reviewers like me a little description of a upcoming book and an offer to send you a review copy, whether that's an ARC or a finished copy. And I've received countless amounts of these emails over the years. And actually, contrary to what you might think, in most cases, I actually do say no or I don't respond because I don't really feel like getting that book or receiving that book or having it part of my collection. And although there's no obligation to read or post or review about that book just because I send you a review copy, and mind you, it's just a review copy, it's just a gifted item, it's not payment to do anything. Although there isn't this requirement, I just don't want to receive a bunch of books that I know I'm not going to read, and I don't want to end up on some shit list for these publishers where they're oh, she always says yes, but then she never posts about these books. So that's one part of things. But what I was actually trying to say was, as I was going through my email that day of all of these review copy requests, almost 90% of the emails that I received were about books by white authors. And that just tells you how much marketing and attention is put behind books by white authors versus books by BIPOC authors. And I've talked about this multiple times before on my channel because I used to work in publishing and I have a background in publishing, but only about 15% of books published in English each year are by BIPOC authors. Almost 85% of books published in English are by white authors. And that is partly reflective of the publishing industry itself and the employees that work in the publishing industry. But just by looking at, the emails and, requests that I get in terms of review copies, you can see how much attention and budget is put behind these books by white authors versus books by BIPOC authors. And that signals more why a lot of books by white authors are more popular or do better because they have more marketing and publicity behind them. So it was super frustrating just that day, going through my emails that day. And so this is why I'm always trying to talk about more BIPOC authors and trying to get you guys to read more diversely because it's just really important to me. If you are a person of color and you can't see yourself in fiction and as a hero of a story, then it's going to be harder to believe that you are capable of more. And when white readers are just always reading about, characters who look like themselves, they struggle to empathize and, understand other people. Anyways, that's my long-winded rant about the diversity of publishing. Back to my stats. So in terms of the method that I read my books in March, I read 1 e-arc, I read 2 ebooks, so that's 3 copies. And then I read 4 library audiobooks and 7 audiobooks that I read. And that gives us a total of 11 audiobooks. Do we see any physical copies on there? No. So yeah, this is an interesting stat to me because just showing how my ability to read a physical copy is just suffering recently and how the audiobooks are just really what are getting me through things. So yeah, we love audiobooks here. And if you're interested in, showing your audiobook pride, check out one of these stickers that I created about how audiobooks are reading. All right, on to the spicier stat of the wrap up. My average rating for March was 4.5 stars, and I didn't have any DNFs this month, which was really good. I had 1 3-star, and then I had 3 4-stars, 3 4.5 stars, and 6 5-stars. 6. I know, that's insane. But I read a lot of really great books, and honestly, I am really good at choosing books that I know and think I'm gonna love. Like, it's not that often that I, end up reading books that I don't like. It's mostly when I'm like doing some sort of challenge or like reading from someone else's taste or something like that, or reading from some list that I end up in some situation where like I don't like the book at the end. But for the most part, I'm so good at choosing books that I am probably gonna love, and I've just honed in on my taste so well that I get so many great stars out of the books I read. But I will say that I do think I am a bit more lax with my star ratings than most people, so that's also probably why I have more higher ratings. But alas, I'm just a lover, not a hater. So with that, let's go through my ratings for each book that I read in March, and then I'll group them by sort of superlatives I would have for the month and what I thought about each. So here are my star ratings in the order that I read the books this month. So The Favorites by Layne Fargo got 4.5 stars. Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton got 3 stars. The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava is 4 stars. Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop got a 5-star by Hwang Boreum. Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler, unsurprisingly, got 5 stars. The Message by Ne-hisi got 5 stars. One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad got 4.5 stars. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga got 4.5 stars. Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang, probably my favorite book of the month of the fucking year, got 5 stars, and I'll talk about that in a sec. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, unsurprisingly, got 5 stars, even though The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes got, like a 3-star for me, I think. But this was Hamish's book, so And then Two Can Play by Hazelwood got 4 stars. Check and Mate by Hazelwood got 4 stars. And James by Percival Everett got an unsurprising 5 stars. With that, let's jump to my reviews. So I read 2 sequels this month, and the first of those was Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler, and I love this book so fucking much. It was so freaking amazing, incredibly well written and harrowing and dark and just so freaking visceral. I feel like I love this way more than Parable of the Sower, which is the first book in this series. And I think that was partly to do with the change in format in this book, and then also just the faster plot in this one, and just generally more going on and just things being a little bit more exciting. I also feel like this one gets far darker, has way more consequences, and just feels way more like visceral and hard hitting. Basically, if you don't know this series, it's by the amazing Octavia E. Butler, who passed away fairly recently, I think, in like the past 10 years. And she's an incredible writer who has written like many sci-fi dystopian books, and all of them feature Black main characters in a time when, Black people were not main characters in books very often, and when many Black authors were not getting published. And there also wasn't very much Black representation in sci-fi fantasy either. So this is the second book in the Earthseed series, and the first book starts with our main character, Lauren Olamina, who is living in actually our current day year, I think in like the 2020s or something like that, or 2030s. But this is a dystopian, imagined future that Octavia E. Butler wrote in the 80s, 90s. I forget when this book came out. And she imagines this like dystopian version of our world that actually is fairly similar to what our world is like right now. And it's set in the United States where, things have gone to shit. People are surviving by tooth and nail. And it's got a bit of this like survival aspect in the first book, especially. But the second book, I think, delves more into the faith aspect that this book has, because essentially the main character creates her own set of beliefs or faith that she calls Earthseed. And she's like this young woman, and she comes up with this stuff, and she creates this community. And there's more of the community in this book, and there's also just more like action and just really dark stuff that happens. So go into this having searched up the content warnings. But again, one main contributing factor of why I like this one so much more, and like why it really just stuck with me, was the change in format, because we actually get a perspective from a different character. I don't want to spoil this for anyone, but a character that we know exists in the future, and she's sort of reflecting on the journal entries from the actual main character. And for the most part, the first and second book are, journal entries from the main character, Lauren Olamina. And it's interesting to be inside her head and like the different things that she thinks and the observations that she makes, but then having the extra commentary from that different character commenting on Lauren's, entries was really fascinating, especially because it's like many years later. So I think that change in format just really added to things for me, and and just really put things into perspective and had me thinking of the main character in a different light, which I thought was really cool. Probably one of the best books that I'll read this year, and it's definitely going on the top 10 list. Okay, next we have Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the other dystopia on this list and the other sequel that I read this month, though technically this is a prequel. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is the new Hunger Games prequel, and this follows Haymitch's story and his Hunger Games. If you haven't read the original series, basically it's this dystopian series where America has been made into this like country called Panem, and it's got these like 12 districts and then a central city called the capital that has all of the, you know, powerful and wealthy people in it, and then the districts are sort of poor and, you know, involved in different industries. And because of a like uprising and rebellion that they had many years ago, since then the capital has held these competitions called the Hunger Games, where they reap or select 2 children between the age of 12 and 18, 1 girl, 1 boy from each district, to compete in this fight to the death competition called the Hunger Games, and basically provide entertainment for the capital, but also create this atmosphere for the districts to remember that this is the punishment for having rebelled and for having tried to take control, and to keep them in their place. And obviously we have Katniss and the whole shebang in the Hunger Games. In the Hunger Games, Katniss has a mentor who is someone who has been in the games before and been a victor, and that was Haymitch. And Haymitch, we know, has won the games before, but we actually don't know very much about his past, about his family, about what happened to him, how he won his Hunger Games, and like all of that. So he's very much a character who's shrouded in mystery, but he's very similar to Katniss. And he's such a complex and interesting character who is like not doing well and is very cynical and has sort of given up on life and, you know, the state of the world, but there is some fire in him. And this is the prequel where we see him go through his Hunger Games, and we know how it's going to end, but we don't know how he gets there and what happens to him that causes him to become like the jaded and, you know, damaged individual that he is in the original series. And I think that that was such a interesting and beautiful conundrum. And as opposed to the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, where we're getting, you know, this sort of villain's perspective and a general commentary on like the evils of people and our society, I think this book was just way more enjoyable because we have a character that we actually want to root for. It's once again told in first person, and Haymitch is just a wonderful character to follow. I think he's just so funny and interesting, but also like it's so heartbreaking to follow his story knowing how it's going to end. I knew that this was going to be heartbreaking, but like it was even more so than I expected. And somehow I managed to not cry, and I think it was mainly because I was like crocheting and listening to the audiobook while I was reading this, and so I was like not pausing too much in between, which I think would have let things sink in a little bit further, and I would have probably cried towards the end, but I was still like heartbroken. I also feel like had I reread the original series before reading this, I would have been like shattered, and I kind of wish I had done that, but here we are. I may reread the whole series again. I think the last time I reread them was like in high school, so it's been like over a decade. But yeah, overall, really loved this. Was so heartbroken, and I just have so many feelings for Haymitch and everything that happens to him. And I loved all of the Easter eggs that we get and just little nods to the, you know, other prequel and also to the original series. And I'm honestly curious to see if Suzanne Collins will like write another prequel for one of the other characters, maybe because there's a lot of other characters that we meet throughout the original series. So I feel like that might be on the table, but we'll see. Who knows? Maybe there's a sequel series that she's working on. I feel like that might be interesting, though I don't know where it would come from, but I could imagine it. Anyways, I did film a reading vlog of me reading this, though I haven't edited it, and I feel like I may not post it because I feel like it won't get the views. If you are interested in this, then let me know, and maybe I will post that vlog, or it might just end up going on my bindery community as a piece of exclusive content for my paid members. So yeah, I guess we'll see. Okay, moving on to a very stunning category, and that is anticipated books that delivered. So the first one is James by Percival Everett, which was the February pick for my book club, the Boundless Book Club. And in true Jenny fashion, I did not finish it within the month, and I had to finish it afterwards. But alas, I finished it. And oh my fucking god, it was so freaking good. I think I started this book and was kind of like wary, wasn't sure if I would actually like it. I'd heard so many amazing things, and all I really knew was that it was a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is like a great American classic apparently. I had to read it for an American lit class and honestly just could not get into it. I was so freaking bored, and I remember being like a thick ass book. But James is actually a very short book. It's by a Black author, and it actually is told from the perspective of James, or Jim, the slave that accompanies Huck on his adventure. And it's told from his perspective, and it was just so wonderful and interesting and just breathtaking to read this book because it was so stunningly done. It had such incredible social commentary and also just was written in this like artistic way that I just cannot describe to you because all the themes that it covered were both historical and also just so topical for our time. And I personally just loved being in James's head and just seeing his side of things and his perspective of things, seeing him deal with the realities of slavery during that time. And it's like on the cusp of like the American Civil War. And it was just both a harrowing read and like heartbreaking because of everything he goes through, but also like a very uplifting and like empowering read because it gave the voice back to James. And honestly, I don't remember too much of the original book and I don't even think I finished it. So I don't know how much of the retelling James actually like veered away from the original or how many liberties it takes, but it is a much shorter book and I think it just gets to the point in a really nuanced and also like pointed way. So highly recommend checking out James. Okay, next, probably my favorite book of this month, of the entire fucking year, because it was so freaking incredible and just so stunning. Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. This is a book that is coming out, I think in May. I will put the release date up on screen for you guys. But this is the second novel from the author Ling Ling Huang. I have read her other book, Natural Beauty. That book was like one of my favorite books of the year. I read it, I think in 2023 or 2024. It was a sort of body horror novel and it was just so well written and had such interesting commentary, but it was also like about a very specific topic. And while I found it interesting and really loved it, like I thought it was really great. But this book, Immaculate Conception, it exceeded every expectation that I had of it, even though those were quite high because I had read Natural Beauty and loved it and knew that Ling Ling Huang had, you know, amazing writing chops. But this book took the cake and just did so much with it. Like, I am astounded by how well written this book was and all the themes that it covered and how super extremely relevant the book was to our current day because it tackles the topic of AI, of our polarized society, of class and privilege. It delves into the art world and, you know, the impermanence of art and the permanence of art and how AI has sort of affected the art world and complicated things. And it also covers this topic, which I thought was just so well done, about how these days we are so focused on preserving, you know, things of the past or remaking things of the past, artists of the past, stories of the past. And we use these different technologies to like preserve, you know, people's voices and likenesses and stories and whatever. But in every attempt that we do that, we are taking away from the possibility of another new and impermanent and beautiful work from someone in our actual current day. Our world is shaped by art and by, you know, the media that we consumed, and by continuously remaking things, we are stealing the opportunity away from, you know, current people to actually make significant works of our time. And I thought that was so interesting. Basically, this book follows our two main characters, but mainly a single main character named Enka. I think that's her name, Enka. And she is basically this art student who goes to this like arts program or something, and she's from the fringe. And in this world, there are these things called buffers that have been introduced to, you know, society and to the States, where essentially it's like this screen thing that essentially cuts off different communities from each other and splits off different classes of people. And when you are looking at the buffer, you are seeing some sort of extended version of your own insular world, and you are not faced with the other people that are actually there or what their lives are like. And so in essence, like, people who are in wealthy neighborhoods will only see wealthy neighborhoods around them, and people who are in poor neighborhoods will only see poor neighborhoods around them. And so it removes this like concept of envy and, you know, wanting more, and reduces crime and like all of this stuff. And it's like the basis of this world that then like develops into more. And then the book also delves into AI and just the idea of art. And basically our main character is going to this art college, and she ends up becoming obsessed with her best friend at this college named Mathilde. The way that her relationship with Mathilde develops is just so beautiful and interesting. And this book delves a lot into like envy and jealousy. And Enka is such a complex and messy character that does a lot of wrong things, but she's also just so convinced in like what she believes. And although her relationship with Mathilde like gets very toxic, it's also like beautiful in some ways. Like, I cannot describe to you the nuance of this book and just the complexity of the relationships in this book and just how incredible it was done. Like, this book spans so many years, but it's like so visceral each moment in the book, and I was just astounded. Like, And I'm so astounded by like all of the things that happen and all the like art pieces that Mathilde comes up with in the book, because I'm just amazed like how the author was able to come up with all of this. Like all of it was just so stunning and so interesting. Although it's the characters and stuff and they're so fascinating, it also came from the author. And so I'm amazed by the artistry of this book and how Ling Ling Huang was able to come up with it. Like this is a book that was so stunningly done that I wish I had written it. Like it was that good. It was a book that I wish I had written, but I know I could never have written because it delves a lot into art, which I'm unfamiliar with, but everything that it was describing was just so fascinating. And yeah, if you're gonna read a book on this list, please go read Immaculate Conception. Go pre-order it. It was so fucking amazing. All right, moving on to the books that were the biggest surprises of the month for me. These books had me absolutely floored by the end because I was just in love with them. Okay, so first up I have If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. I've heard so many mixed opinions about this book, but honestly, I ended up loving it so much and I'm so glad I picked it up. This book was on my physical TBR for years, I feel like at this point, and I kept meaning to pick it up, but I never got around to it. And thankfully, I decided to pick it up because I was able to get the audiobook from the library, and so I was like, okay, this is my moment. And also I wanted to read it because it's been described as being very similar to the book that I'm publishing with my imprint, Boundless Press, and that is Dust Settles North by Dina El-Junaidi. I also have the cover of it up here behind me on a poster, but this book is partially set in Egypt because one of the main characters decides to stay in Egypt after her mother's death, sort of reconnect with her roots and sort of figure out her life. And that part of Dust Settles North is actually quite similar to If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, because essentially this book follows two main characters, but mainly a main character, a girl who ends up moving to Egypt suddenly, specifically to Cairo, and she's just decided to move there for no reason that we can like figure out. And we're just sort of following her as she's like living her life in Cairo and dealing with the different things that are different. And she's Egyptian American, so she has roots there, but she ends up meeting this guy who is this like young man who had been part of the revolutions at the time. And this is set around, I think, 2012 or something. And he is this young man who is from this small town called Shubrahit. We are also getting perspective chapters from him. They end up in this like weird sort of collision course and sort of relationship as well. The whole book is like so strange because it is written in this weird format where each book is sort of started with a question and each question is like super random and weird. And the book sort of flips between the two perspectives, so the girl and the guy. But if you're reading the book, you can't actually tell like who's speaking for the most part. So the audiobook honestly ended up being a really good decision because they had different narrators for the girl and the guy, because I think otherwise I would have been super confused. But I think that was the point of the book, for you to be confused and for them to sort of meld together, because there's a twist towards the end of the book that reveals something very, very interesting about, you know, these perspectives that you've been reading from, changes the whole game. And I was so floored by that twist and I was just so intrigued. And I think up until that point I was enjoying the book and I found it really interesting, and it was obviously like some sort of commentary on certain things, and these characters were meant to be unreliable and people that you weren't supposed to just believe on face value. And the last section of the book like really delved into that, and honestly I just ended up really loving like the ambiguity of the ending, so that made for a really interesting read. Like if you're looking for a book that is weird and also just strange and will make you think, like this is definitely one to pick up. And it honestly felt very similar to Dust Settles North in certain ways, even though the tone I would say is a bit different. I would say Dust Settles North is a little bit more on the like sincere end of things versus like being satirical or, you know, showing these unreliable characters, but the setting and like sort of setup of things felt similar. Okay, and then the other book that was a big surprise for me was Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop by Hwang. This book was the January book club pick for my book club, the Boundless Book Club. And again, I did not finish this within the month and had to finish it later. I love this book so much, guys. Like this one got a 5 stars from me because I just loved it so much by the end. Although this book starts out very strange and sort of atypical, by the end I was just so astounded and just impressed by everything that it covered, while also being such a fun, sweet, heartwarming, cozy read. This book is a translated fiction from Korean, and essentially it is set in Korea in this neighborhood called Hyunamdong, and it follows this woman who opens a independent bookshop. And And we're literally just following like the day-to-day of her running this bookshop. And of course, my camera overheated for some goddamn reason. So here we are again. As I was saying, this book, oh my God. Basically, we're just following this woman as she does the day-to-day of running this independent bookstore. But here and there, we get perspective chapters from the other people around her who are helping with the bookshop or who are part of the community. There's the barista for the coffee shop inside the bookstore. There are his friends. There are the people who come for like book club. There's like a student. There are these different people in her life who are starting to support her in her independent bookshop. And I think the overall theme and question that everyone in the book deals with and sort of considers is the meaning of work and, you know, your connection to work and how the work that you do can in some ways be meaningful, can in some ways fulfill you, but also how the industry of work is very complex and how everyone's connection to it is very different. Essentially, our main character had left this like corporate world and this demanding career and this lifestyle that was very like capitalist and sort of, you know, you have to like go after everything and just work really hard and not really care about other things in life. And she ends up finding herself changing her life in a drastic and dramatic way and then opening this bookshop and then sort of investing her time and energy into the things that she really loves. And I think the way that everyone in the book sort of deals with work and their relationship to it was just so interesting. I was also reading this book as I was like transitioning out of, you know, leaving my corporate, you know, 9 to 5 marketing job and switching to being self-employed and doing YouTube full time and, you know, being a publisher and trying to write and all these other things. And I was having a lot of similar questions that I think this book just really ended up being such a comfort and just overall a really helpful thing to be reading at that time. Like it was just perfect. I truly believe that some books just come to you at the perfect time that you need them and are meant to comfort you in those ways or help you through things or help you consider and understand parts of your life. And this book was definitely that for me. I made this comparison in a different video, but if you're someone who loved Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, even though that one's a fantasy, it still involves this character leaving behind a life that they thought they wanted or needed to live and ends up sort of taking on this new small life that is so much more fulfilling. I think that that was such a beautiful thing that both books ended up managing to convey. I feel like for some people who read Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop, you may find that like it's slow or not much is happening. It's very much like zero plot, all vibes kind of thing, but there are like small things happening. I think it may not be, you know, fun or interesting, but for me personally, like it just worked so well. I loved the long contemplative passages and just the way that the characters are thinking so deeply about things. And I love that it was sort of a slow paced read. Like it was meant to be a, you know, take a step back, take a breath in and just enjoy this moment. And I think I was able to do that with this book and it was so amazing. All right, on to the nonfiction that I read. So the first nonfiction that I read was Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I was listening to the audiobook of this one while I was making my mini little books for my TBR video for March. And honestly, I was expecting a lot from this book because I have read 2 of her other books. I've read Good Material and I've read Ghosts. Ghosts I really enjoyed. Good Material I liked. I didn't love it, but I did like the last section of it. And both books are sort of like contemporary fictions about, you know, a woman living in, you know, our day and age, dating and social, you know, things and just sort of being a relatable read, I think. And so I had seen Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton everywhere on Book Talk for ages, and it seemed like the gospel for some people. But this was one of those situations where like Book Talk really did me dirty because I feel like this book was just so basic in my opinion. And I like feel bad saying that, but like to be honest, it was because she's just talking about like her relationship with the concept of love and like, you know, her female friendships, her dating history, her social history, like, you know, the things that she did when she was in college versus like later. And honestly, like, although I found it interesting, I also found her to be kind of like irresponsible in my opinion in some respects. Like if I went around and did half the shit that she did, I would have gotten whooped by my mother. So like, you know, it felt very unrelatable as someone who is a child of refugees and like comes from the background that I do. So I feel like although it's relatable for other people, it was absolutely not for me. In some ways it was, but like, you know, and I felt like a lot of the things that she talks about in the memoir were sort of very similar to the things that she talks about in her novels. And I feel like each one was sort of like a copy and change a bit and then replace situation where like all of them sort of deal with the same things, but not in like a dramatically different way or nuanced take. Like I think all of it still sort of revolves around the same subject matter and is not so interesting or fascinating. And so everything felt very mid. And so, of course, the memoir in turn just felt very mid because for me, I feel like I have high expectations when it comes to memoirs because I've read such incredible ones before. And so this was just like, like, yeah, it was nice. She's a good narrator. Like, she's a good writer, but it wasn't that interesting. And I don't feel like I gained much out of it, especially in terms of like hearing her story. Personally, I feel like if I'm reading a memoir, like I want to hear a really incredible and compelling story. And, maybe that's just a high expectation of mine. And maybe, you might be looking for a memoir that's a little bit more normal and less life-changing and more just like relatable or about the everyday. So take this with a grain of salt, but personally, I just found it very mid. However, the next nonfiction that I read was absolutely fantastic, and that was The Message by Ne-hisi. I read this through the audiobook, and then I was like, I need a physical copy ASAP because this was so fucking fantastic. And this book, it's so interesting because Ne-hisi, I had been following him in the news and stuff as he was like talking about Palestine and as he was promoting this book, because there's a part in this book where he talks about Palestine and visiting Palestine, just everything that he observed there. He connects it back to, a lot of the stuff that he talks about in relation to his own politics and his own history as a Black person in America. And overall, I just found it really interesting, just the way that he, much like I would say Angela Davis, connects the politics of, the US and whatever with our global context. And I really appreciated that because I feel like that's something that's just not done enough when talking about the specific, politics or issues of like racism and systemic racism that goes on in certain places. And so he does a really incredible job of connecting those things. But one thing that I found really interesting was that he says at the beginning that he set out to actually write a book about writing. And then with everything that was going on and like things that he was experiencing, he ended up writing something different. But the bones of that original like concept still remain throughout the book, in the sense that he is in some ways saying how these different experiences affected his writing and talks about writing in a larger sense in terms of like the topics that he covers. And I just love that because he is an incredible writer. Like every line of this book was just so beautifully written and such a stunning piece of work. And just the way that he crafts the stories and starts each chapter and how he ends it and how he comes to the point of things is so beautifully and artfully done. So yes, The Message, absolutely incredible. Like I'm so happy I read this, and I definitely want to go and grab his other books and give those a read. And I listened to this through the audiobook and he narrates it really well. So yeah, very happy with this one and highly recommend if you're going to pick up a nonfiction, pick up this one. The next nonfiction that I read was also really stunning, and that is One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El-Akkad. This book was on my radar ever since I heard about it, and the title of the book is actually based off of a tweet that the author had written. He's a journalist like Ne-hisi, and he is an Egyptian American author and writer, and as an Arab American person, like he has been experiencing a lot of different things over these past few decades. And I think what was interesting about this book was that he sort of confronts it from the perspective of like how he has become disillusioned with the West and with all of its promises and just, his own faith in the stories and things that he was working on as well. And how it's dehumanizing to be living between these two worlds and seeing how this one world just so completely devalues you. I think this is such a topical read for right now, and especially with everything going on at the moment and with what's happening in the US and with people getting abducted by ICE for their views on Palestine, just all of that, like that is horrifying. And just another example of like how messed up things have become. And another thing that was interesting about this book was that the title of it is based off of a tweet that the author had written and had posted in October of 2023. And it was this idea that, one day everyone will have always been against this. Like everyone will have seen everything that has happened in Palestine, the genocide. And in those moments, there's a lot of people like saying different things. Oh, it's not a genocide. Oh, decrying that, these things aren't happening. But in several years, we will get to a point where everyone will say that they were always against it, much like people said, of the Holocaust, of these different tragedies over the many years. And it's just this idea of like no one acts in the moment, but in hindsight, they always like pretend that they do. And it's just such an awful thing. I have so many thoughts, but yeah, this was really well done. I kind of do wish I read this one before I read The Message, just because I really love Ne-hisi writing a little bit more. And so it kind of affected how I felt about this one because I read it right after, like immediately after. And same with like the audiobook narration. I think Ne-hisi has a much more compelling like audiobook narration. However, the subject matter of this one was just so incredibly done. And I definitely want to read more from this author. Okay, and then on to the romances. I have one very significant one and then three that were also really good. So the first of those is The Truth According to Ember by Danica and Nava. And this is one of the first ever books that is a rom-com that has been published by an indigenous author, a Native American author. And the second I found that out, I was just like so shocked because again, like as I've been saying for like ages, diversity in publishing is awful, but also in terms of indigenous and Native American rep. And like this is a problem across the US and Canada and, you know, Australia. And I've had the observation before that it's so frustrating that there's so many books by indigenous authors about, you know, trauma or dystopian futures or just like the problem of their existence, but not about their joy and about their happiness. And I think this is a problem that comes across for a lot of BIPOC, you know, authors and voices and people, because often publishers want to publish their stories of suffering because those are like important topics, but they don't want to publish their happiness and their stories of joy. That is another important part of representation that we need. We need to see the full spectrum of people who have so much depth to them, just like everyone else. Anyways, that little rant aside, this book was just so freaking fun and so freaking cute. It had the most like adorable and endearing main character that I've ever read. Ember is such a beautiful spark of life. Ember is an indigenous woman living in the States. She is a Chickasaw woman, I believe, and she has faced a lot of difficulties in life, but she generally has a very positive attitude, I think, especially throughout the book. And she ends up in this weird situation where she's trying to apply for jobs in order to earn the income that she needs to be able to take classes and take programs to become an actual accountant. But she's unable to do that because she doesn't have the money. And so she needs to get jobs. But all the jobs that she wants to be able to do and that earn enough money require some sort of education. And so she's in this like weird catch-22. And she's been earning money from like her cousins, I think bowling alley or something. And she's been working like consistently, but it's still not enough. And she's been doing the accounting and sort of taxes for her cousin's business for a long time. And she's quite good with the numbers and she's got some experience there. But that isn't like enough of a qualification on her resume. But regardless, she beefs up her resume and does all these things. But every time she has to answer some sort of survey in the employment questionnaires about, you know, her ethnicity and her race, every time she checks off Indigenous or Native American, she never hears back. But at the beginning of the book, she decides, you know, maybe I should try something different. So although her mother is Indigenous, her father is white. So she decides to start checking off Caucasian on her employment surveys, and then she starts to hear back. The interesting thing was that this book and that initial like concept is actually based off of the author's own experience in the job market and doing a similar thing, starting to check off Caucasian on her employment surveys. And that was just so interesting to me because yeah, it just shows like the inequalities across the system for people of color, for BIPOC individuals. And so basically this book follows Ember as she gets herself into more and more lies in order to just like live the life that she should be able to live. And she gets herself in a kerfuffle and she gets manipulated by people, but she is such a wonderful and sweet main character who is just so endearing and who is just so earnest and like, you know, trying her hardest. And I think that aspect of her was just so heartwarming and just like something you want to follow and cheer for. Obviously, there is a romance with a fellow Native American person here in the book, and he is a wonderful, hunky guy who has similar concerns as the main character and who is dealing with similar issues. And I think one thing that I liked about this book was that it also talks about how work can just be work. Like it doesn't need to be the thing that fulfills your life and like fills up everything. Like it can just be the thing that earns you money and supports your lifestyle. And I also really liked that representation. But overall, this was just such a heartwarming read, and I did end up making it the book club pick for my book club, the Boundless Book Club, for April. If you're interested in joining us for the discussion, it's on Discord, which you can join through my bindery community. You just sign up with your email and then you get access to my bindery community as a free follower, which is like kind of my newsletter. And you can also connect your Discord to the server and discuss the book with us. Okay, my battery is about to die, so we're going to go through this quick for the last few books. So I also read The Favorites, which I don't know where I put the book. I have it, but anyways. The Favorites. This is a retelling of Wuthering Heights and is a bit of a Daisy Jones and the Six mashup because it essentially follows these two fictional, you know, famous ice skaters from like the early 2000s. And it's Katarina Shaw and Heath Rocha. Got the whole Wuthering Heights setup, but in our present day or early 2000s. And the way the book is told is through like perspective chapters from Katarina, but we are also getting interspersed chapters of this like documentary that is being filmed about them. But the two of them are not in the documentary. And so there's other people people, like the characters around them that are getting interviewed many, many years later for this documentary and telling the story of what happened then and like all the drama and, you know, the scandals and the secrets and whatever. And then we're also getting Katarina's story. It was such a fun read, honestly. Like this was a romance, but it was also kind of a like drama, and it definitely had that Daisy Jones and the Six vibe and that nostalgia and like the idea of competition and just this like love of like a specific thing. And in this case, it was ice skating, the idea of ambition and just all of these other stuff. But it also delivered on a lot of the like angstiness and pining of Wuthering Heights, which I really enjoyed as well. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook if you can, because the audiobook is narrated by multiple people because of the whole documentary format. That was really fun. And yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. And thank you to the publisher for sending it to me. Okay, and then finally, I read 2 Ali Hazelwood audiobooks, and the first was Check and Mate, which is actually her YA romance, which I kept saying that I probably wouldn't read because it was YA, but honestly, I started reading it and I was like, this is basically an adult novel, but with like teenage characters and no explicit sex. Like it definitely felt like a Ali Hazelwood novel. Like it still felt like one of the, you know, STEMinist books or something like that, but with just younger characters. And so in that way, it was actually really enjoyable. I liked the, you know, idea of chess. I did feel like the main character did become a little brash and like sort of awful to her loved ones towards the end because she was like going through it, but she's a teenager, so understandable. I'm not gonna be one of those people who says, you know, the YA book had an unlikable main character who is acting like a teenager when she's actually a teenager. But yeah, I like the romance. It was really cute. I find that Ali Hazelwood has this like skill of writing books with main characters that I relate to so fucking hard. And the way that the main character sort of takes care of her family just reminded me so much of myself. And it was definitely like hitting home in that aspect. So I definitely felt for the main character in that way, but also this idea of like her thinking that she needs to be responsible for everything and sort of thinking that people can't do things without her and that kind of thing. Like this idea of just taking too much responsibility on, I related so hard. So yeah, it was another hit from Ali Hazelwood for me. And then the other audiobook that I listened to was Two Can Play, which was the Spotify exclusive like novella that Ali Hazelwood had released. But as I said earlier in this video, I use Everand a lot, and I was scrolling through Everand and what did I find? Two Can Play. So I was like, oh my God, it's like not exclusive to Spotify anymore, because I didn't feel like buying it. But once I saw it on Everend, I was like, okay, I'm reading this because I finished one Ali Hazelwood romance and I was like, I could use another. This one was really fun and steamy, and it follows 2 game designers, and basically they are from these like 2 different studios who are going to work on this like new game adaptation of this like famous fantasy series. The 2 studios are supposed to like work on the project together, and so they go on this retreat to sort of bond because they have some bad blood between them, and so the 2 of them are sort of invested in like making sure that works. But they also have this like weird sort of strained relationship between the 2 main characters because they both have these like weird misunderstandings about each other and think that the other person hates them, and then they learn things. And then it's just a whole lot of like, you know, cutesy cozy cabin sex. And honestly, I really enjoyed it. So that was fun. And I liked the game, you know, setup and just this idea of like them being so invested in this like book series that they really want to do justice to. And I actually really liked the idea of this like fictional fantasy series that they talk about in the book. Like I would love to read that series. So I feel like Ali Hazelwood should write that because I'd be interested. But overall, really enjoyed it. Not my favorite romance ever, but it was still really fun and enjoyable. So Ali Hazelwood just delivers, I swear, on every romance for me. And I think I only haven't read her novella Bind Up, and I do have a physical copy of that. So I think once I read that, I will have read all of her books, and then I'll have more because she's so prolific and she's probably going to release another thing this year. So yeah. Okay, my camera battery's about to die. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you guys thought of each of these books, what your reviews of them are, and let me know if there's any books that you think I should read based off of what I've reviewed today. And thank you so much to my Bindery members for supporting me and my channel and making all of this possible. You guys are the best, and I appreciate you immensely. If you want to get thanked on screen like this, then join one of the paid tiers of my community, the Moon or Star tiers or the Galaxy tier, and you'll see your name on screen. And you also get access to a bunch of exclusive and extra content from me, including journal entries, exclusive videos, and the whole behind the scene publishing process with my imprint, Boundless Press, and about, you know, publishing Dust Settles North and the next book that we're publishing, Burn the Sea, and all of the things in between. And again, if you want to join my free Discord, all you have to do is become a free follower on my Bindery community. Just sign up with your email. You get like free updates as well, so that's kind of cool. And it's a great way to support me and my channel and ensure that I can continue doing this for you for the far future. Thank you all again. I'll see you in my next video, and please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!